let me just start by welcoming you and to this discussion and this conversation. It is the 31st of August, and we are recording this for SAASWIPP, and the idea is to distribute it, to make it available to social workers in private practice. So maybe then a good place to start would be introductions. We can go around. I'm Harriet, Aisha, and Lisa. So let's start with Harriet, and if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, where your practice is based, and what kind of work you do.
So Vernon, I am a social worker in private practice in Midrand, and during the lockdown period, I think I have totally surprised myself by being able to do a lot of virtual work. I think from a face-to-face practice, I've moved to Zoom and Teams sessions. And yeah, that was what I've been focusing on, mostly support people being challenged with life.
Okay.
Yes, that's
Perfect.
me.
Okay, great, thank you. Lisa, tell us a little bit about your practice.
Thanks, Vanna. Yes, I've also got a private practice. I've got a practice from 2 premises, one in Randburg and one in Four Ways. I've got a family counselling and play therapy practice. So it started off just as play therapy, but obviously children don't need me on their own. And I work from a systems perspective. So yeah, it's just over the years broadened into family and then also adult work. And then recently during COVID, I've actually been called in online to also do a bit of corporate support work just for the stressors of COVID.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. And Aisha?
Hi, everybody. My name is Aisha, and I'm also a social worker in private practice. I am based in Pretoria with an office in Menlyn and one in Midstream. And I work solution-focused, brief therapy-based, because I work in the EAP space as well. And I think for me, the biggest nicety of COVID is that move onto the online space. So really taken my practice almost 99% online. 1% of my work is at Midstream Evexia, where I run support groups for inpatients on dealing on, with different life skills topics. And then I also teach at SAASWIPP. So I teach first years, and my field of speciality there is communication. And I've actually taken, the leap into online teaching because of COVID. So we're all doing 100% online teaching through different modalities, and it's been very, very exciting. So yeah, that's me.
Great, thank you. Right, so and I'm Werner. I'm based in Port Elizabeth, also social worker in private practice, and my practice is sort of split into 2 parts. One part being therapeutic work with a broad range of things, and then the other part training and development of social service professionals. So maybe one place to start off with is sort of, everyone's mentioned the shift to online work. Maybe we should actually start there and sort of just talk a little bit about what has this been like, because I don't think online work is something that as social workers we really even thought of pre-COVID. I don't know about you, but it wasn't something that was even on my radar. What was it? I mean, what's your experience like, Aisha?
Yeah, so look, it was very scary. I think the challenges that came with moving online with teletherapy, and all the medical aids at the beginning saying, no, they're not going to pay us. And so there was a lot of that very unsure sort of space. And then it was just the decision, you know what, if you want to reach your client, you've got to shift and you've got to move. My first 2 months of COVID, I had absolutely zero income because nobody wanted to do online counseling. So I don't know how others experience it, but mine was like, there's nothing happening. I taught online because we were trained sort of like instantly to go onto Zoom and teach our students. So that was forced. And so because I was so comfortable with the space, I kept telling my clients, let's just do a Zoom session. Let's do a Zoom session. It took me 2 months to convince people to come online. Now you can't get enough of them. And so that shift was amazing in terms of that. It was scary, but I think, yeah, I think I've adjusted and I love it. And I can see my clients are starting to love it too.
Okay. Okay. So, Lisa, what about you? I mean, in terms of, I mean, Aisha mentioned an sort of a, I think a critical thing. I don't know how that impacted everybody else in terms of the initial impact for your practice, whether you had clients, how that impacted you, and then your experience of doing online work.
I agree with Aisha. I was very quiet for the first 6 weeks. And I put it down to a time of crisis for clients also. Like we had all been put into lockdown. We didn't know what this meant, how we're going to social distance. So I think I just understood it, that everybody was trying to find their feet in it. But I agree with Aisha. I did find resistance to the online sessions, especially with my children. And in fact, I actually found them the hardest population to work with, because they would get up and run out the room, and I'd go, hey, are you coming back? So that was very difficult. One of my little clients actually was fiddling with Play-Doh and dropped it on her dog's lap. Her dog was on her lap, and had to then go and get scissors, and I just saw these huge scissors coming out, and I was going, wait, don't do that. So I find that challenging too, in that not that I control my clients, but the level of control and sort of the sense of space was just so different. But yes, it started picking up as people got used to. I think as people started working online and doing school online, it became less foreign.
Lisa, did you also have like a period initially where you didn't have clients, where you couldn't work?
A very quiet period initially, probably 3 clients for a month or even 6 weeks, and those were even sporadic, as and when they could make it.
Wow, sure. Harriet, how did you experience that initially?
I was quite fortunate I found a telehealth for mental health professional training online, a distance training for 2 days, and I think that was just a blessing, because I think that really helped me. A lot of people that attended the workshop have already been exposed to it. It was a lot of people from overseas, so they were already into it, and they were they were giving like support and suggestions and stuff like that. So I think that was the basis from where I was coming from, and that was really quite helpful. I did a lot of research around it, and you know what, initially I practiced a little bit on my family, you know, just to get to see what it must look behind you, because you know what people are looking at, and just to set up your office in a way that you know, that it's something that's helpful for people. I had amazing experiences where people just embraced it. They would take me through their house and show me their dogs, or I just I found it was all of a sudden it was almost like an extension of the therapeutic setting, where I that little bit of insight behind the scenes, I found that very refreshing.
Well, that's actually a very interesting sort of dimension. So you're saying that clients actually sort of you're actually able to see more into their lives, you know, working like this.
Yes, totally. And it was also significant what people wanted you to see behind them, where they sat. During the lockdown, I had a lot of people that actually sat in their cars, because that was the only time or the only space where there was privacy for them to have these communications. And I think initially with a lot of the sessions were more on educating your clients around the online space, and the confidentiality where they sat and who could hear, and their sensitivity about that was quite important. Just the educational part of it first for them.
Yeah. Did you find, and so this is a question for everyone, did you find that clients had concerns initially around things like confidentiality or you know, any other concerns about sort of working online, or did they just embrace it?
So
Sorry.
No, you go.
I did find that my clients, I think I had more of a concern about confidentiality and what we were allowed and what forums were safe and not safe. So I'm really sure. And I remember having a couple of conversations with colleagues, but I really didn't pick it up from my clients. They didn't really mind at all. They would say to me, let's WhatsApp video. In fact, it's still a forum that I use quite a lot because they've all got it, and somehow connection seems better on that. But yes, I didn't find resistance from them on that at all. It was more me.
Well, I think, you know, being sort of in the profession where we are, I think it's part of our, I suppose, of our role to be concerned about protecting our clients. And so moving into the online space, I think it's sort of natural that we had those concerns, you know, around how safe is it, how do we protect client information, and initially nobody knew, right? We had to ask each other, we had to research, we had to,
Yes.
it was I think a crazy first 2 months, basically, scrambling around trying to get information. Aisha, I mean,
for me, it was exciting. Yes, we did scramble, you know, is Zoom safe? And then people said, no, Zoom is not safe. Try Teams. And, you know, and it was a nightmare in terms of finding the right platform. And so I agree with Lisa. I also use WhatsApp call a lot. I think it's just people are comfortable and it's quick. They know how to do that. Trying to get them to video call is a whole other story. And sometimes when the reception is bad or there's load shedding, you know, so we had those challenges. I think that was more of an issue for people. What happens when I get cut off? What will we do? And so the contract with your client at the beginning of the first session had to be very clear in terms of that. You know, if we get cut off, what happens then? Do we reconvene at another time? And I think for me also, I always insist that they try and wear headphones so that people don't hear everything. A lot of them panic and say, but you know, if somebody walks past, they're going to hear you and me. So I always say, put the headphones on and then they only hear one side of the conversation. So that was quite exciting. And I think, you know, in terms of what Harriet said, where they go and sit in their car, I also had a lot of car sessions. I have a lot of bedroom sessions. I think the worst part is the students when they do their exams and they lie in bed and they turn their cameras on and they're doing an exam. And the one student actually said to us, you know, just say hi to my girlfriend. And he turned the camera and they were lying in bed. Where we had to, you know, so we have stupid people like that as well. So I think it was very exciting just to get people to understand the boundaries of using the platforms. But yeah, so far so good.
All right. So I mean, there's a lot of sort of education we have to do around getting clients to understand how to best use this kind of a platform. And then it sounds to me like, you know, for some clients it can be quite challenging. So I mean, Lisa, you're talking about when you work with children, so it sounds like there's some unique challenges there. I wonder if you can talk about that for a second in terms of what did you experience and how did you sort of overcome that, or how did you deal with it?
So after that one, which was probably my most difficult one in terms of feeling like I can't stop this child chopping up her dog. So the mum, I was trying to phone the mum while I could see the child on camera, but she was on a work call, so she didn't take my call. So after that, I asked that if the parents could be available throughout the 40 minutes of the session, in case I needed to get hold of them. I just found that was a much safer route to go. Otherwise, I had a child on the other end of a camera who she could leave for 20 minutes and I couldn't do anything about it. So I think it left me feeling at times quite helpless in terms of managing the space, which one obviously doesn't have in a therapy room or in a playroom. So yes, that was one thing I asked, is that the parents would be available through the duration of the session in case I needed to get hold of them. I must say I didn't really see that many children. They also weren't, I found that we lost our, especially with the sort of 10-year-olds to 15, there was definitely something lost that I didn't find as much with adults. And yeah, we lost momentum. So yes, I found that the children particularly sort of challenging to in terms of working online. But that was my experience. I'd like to hear any other. Yeah.
I also work with a younger child, and I think I was just really fortunate that I did a lot of preparations with the parents first. And they had a total buy-in. So it was, they made very sure every time that the child had his session that he could have it in his bedroom, on his bunk bed. So I went and visited him on his bunk bed. And mommy would pop in every now and again just to see if things were okay. And the final session we actually had together. So they were really, yeah, I think when you have their buy-in and they kind of, they're not part of the session or interfering with the process, but they oversee it. It's actually just like the online learning. The parents have to, there must be some responsibility to the process. I think that makes quite a difference. But I think it must be very scary to see the child there with the scissors and the dog and not knowing what the outcome's going to be.
No, so it sounds then that the collaboration between the social worker and the parents so important, because the parents then in a way become sort of a big part of the boundary setting and providing the safe space for us to work in, because we don't control that like we normally do in our own practice settings.
I even previously also had a session with a teacher and a child. That ended up, the child was quite anxious and the teacher struggled a little bit with the management of that. And I found that was just such a, although they had to have their masks on, but it was also a really meaningful conversation. I think I'm so excited about the opportunities and the making conversations more happening because of the online. Yes.
So I didn't anticipate asking this question, but maybe I want to ask this. Do you see online work, let's say post-COVID, and we don't know what post-COVID will really look like, but do you see this as has your practice changed permanently? Do you see yourself sort of going back to mainly face-to-face work, or do you see this as something that has become part of how you will work?
Yeah, can I go? So Savannah, very good question, and I think it's something that I was sitting with also for a while, you know, going through this process of starting it and now being in it and thinking, oh my gosh, this has opened up an entire new spectrum. It will save people from the drive to my practice, and it will save workplaces within the EAP field from having a person out of the office for 2 hours or more, you know, hour session, half an hour travel back, and for those that disappear on the way and don't come back. So I think it will save organizations quite a bit. In terms of time, it will save me a lot in terms of time as well, you know, petrol, traveling. It will save me on rent, because luckily I pay an hourly rate to the space where I use the offices. So it's going to save me, it's going to save them. So I think for me it's a win-win. And also want to add that I have international clients at the moment, which I didn't have before COVID. So I've got a client in Paris and I've got a client in the UK. that are South Africans that are stuck there with COVID. And so it's just opened up that platform, and I'm actually quite excited to keep this as a modality, 100%.
Okay. Lisa, what about you?
I definitely will keep it also, Vanna. I've also got a client in Portugal, and funny enough, we were doing this online before COVID even hit. She was an old client that moved overseas. So I had some WhatsApp video call experience, which is nothing when COVID hit. But yes, at least I did know that for some people it could work. I also agree with Aisha. There are many clients of mine that say it saves them so much in petrol time, that were popping out in their lunch hour and would be late back to work. And so yes, I definitely think I'll keep it. I wouldn't have to keep it.
It's my internet stuck. Vanna, are you still there?
Yes, I think we Lisa's breaking a bit.
Something like this, and sometimes.
All right, sorry, Lisa, we lost you, your audio there for a bit.
For a lot of the session.
Yeah, but that's fine. I mean, I think we sort of get the gist of it. I mean, it sounds like generally most people would be. I don't know about you, Harriet, as well. Will you be keeping online work as a major part of your practice?
You know what, Vanna, I actually looked at a study that a girl, Camilla Granholm, did in Finland. And she did a study on social work and digital transfer, blending services for the next generation. And it's actually an amazing study, and how we can use a more blended approach with our clients. I've suggested to some of the people that I've mainly seen online too, if they are able to come for a face-to-face session a little bit in between. But some clients, because it was their first experience online, they actually don't see the need for face-to-face. But I think it can actually be quite a healthy approach to have a little bit of both. Just for some of the sessions, I know some of the modalities you can do online, but it's a little bit just more personal if you can do it face-to-face.
So, I mean, it does sound like one has to, I suppose, make some adjustments in terms of, I think some modalities may be easier and some may not be so easy. Did you find at all that there were clients who needed to or wanted to make an appointment, who needed to see you, but decided not to use the online platform and therefore postponed, or in the end didn't make use of services at all? Aisha, what was did you have any clients like that?
I think at the beginning, yes, there was a few that didn't, want to do the online, and said, no, I really want a face-to-face. I really want a face-to-face. And then things would happen, like with the traveling, not getting a permit. Remember at the beginning, we still this permit thing. And so then people would say, okay, because I can't get a permit, yeah, maybe let's try it online. And then they do it, and then they go like, okay, it's not so bad. And so I think also those clients, the ones that cancel at the last minute and say, oh, I've got a meeting and I'm running late and I won't make it to your office. You actually have that opportunity to say, you know what, let's just do a WhatsApp call. Can you find a private space and let's do this? And so I think there we're going to kind of minimize that no-show clients. So I would use that as a backup, definitely, post-COVID, 100%.
I'm thinking in terms of, part of the thread of our conversation is also sort of touching on trauma and the impact of COVID in terms of trauma. Now, I mean, we accept that not everyone has been traumatized by the experiences, but some people have been. And I'm wondering if what you've seen in your practice in terms of the impact of COVID, especially as it relates to trauma, what are people seeking help for? What are the experiences? What are you seeing in your practice? And are there any trends or anything like that? Maybe Lisa, if I can ask you.
Yeah, I definitely am seeing, because I don't really work with substance abuse or anything, I'm sure there's a lot of that. But what I'm seeing a lot of is anxiety, depression, and fatigue. And I think the fatigue is something that sort of goes across the lines from young to old. And for me, it's also that there's no sense of an end to this, or not, maybe there is an end, but we don't know when it will be. And so we can't sort of hold out for 2 months or hold out for 6 years, for 6 months, because we actually just don't know when this is going to end, which I think also brings a sense of helplessness to my clients. That's also something I've seen, is a sense of helplessness and stressors that they would have been able to manage now, they're really struggling with. And then definitely the social distancing and the people that we're regulating, stabilizing, loving people in their lives are having their own trauma experiences, some of them. And so feeling that their support systems are not what they were. So it's a very general thing. But yes, definitely impacting across a wide range. Then the corporate clients I work with are really struggling with the cognitive sort of fallout of COVID. And what I mean is sort of, it's a creative company, so they've got no motivation, they can't find creativity. And I think if we know the brain from neuroscience, we know where that comes from, but it happens nevertheless. And so yes, that feeling of, as I say, I'm not managing stressors that maybe in the past were very manageable. And then there's support systems.
And I mean, of course, for us, support systems are so critical, because a lot of what we do is strengthening people's support systems and reconnecting them with social supports where it's available. And lockdown has effectively removed that as a strategy for us to a large extent. We're not able to actually support clients there. Harriet, what have you seen in terms of your practice?
I think the biggest thing that I was faced with was clients really challenged around the thing of working from home. I think in the beginning they felt quite overwhelmed by the amount of looking over their shoulders and having to report in and having to prove that they're actually working when they're at home. And kind of micromanaged. And I think that resulted in a lot of almost shifting of boundaries, that people started overworking. They started feeling that they have to prove that they're working, and they often didn't stick to actual work time when they were at home. Now people were able to get hold of them later in the day, so they started shifting their days to later times in the day, and I think family time was a little bit compromised. The other thing with the bandwidth of some of them working from home and having children at home, and who gets preference to being online. And then something that I found quite overwhelming was the inability to visit people when they're sick. That dropping them off at the hospital and the fear and not getting feedback and feeling so hopeless, and sometimes blaming themselves that they did take their loved ones to the hospital, yeah, just the process of not knowing and worrying about family members and not able to see them.
Well, there are so many things that you mentioned that we could actually pick up on to discuss, but I think the one that we absolutely have to talk about is the impact of family members getting sick, and what you're talking about, having to take them to hospital, and unfortunately for some people losing family members and the impact of that. So Aisha, I wonder if have you had any experiences in your practice with regards to people maybe talking about how that's impacted them?
Yes, Vanna, you know, I had one client that actually brought it so real, you know, and so, yeah, she made it so real to me when I listened to her story. And so basically she contracted COVID at work. Her husband contracted it from her and her son who was in matric. So that was quite an interesting dynamic, you know. Here's this young person and then the parents. And she said she got to a point where she had to take her husband to hospital. And she dropped him off at the door, as they normally say, and then they took him away. And she waited because she thought, you know what, he's going to have to let her know whether he's going to stay or not. And then he messaged her to say, listen, they're keeping me. Go and get my bag with my goodies. So she went back home, packed his little bag and took it to the hospital. And she parked in the COVID bay, you know, the testing bay. And she called to say that she's downstairs, but nobody took the call. And then 2 nurses came out, she said, in full PPE kit. And she opened her window and she said, guys, I'm sorry, I'm COVID positive. I need to get this bag to my husband. He's been admitted. They looked at her and said, no, sorry, you need to ask somebody else. And they walked away. And she said in that moment, she sat there and she wept because she thought, how do I get to him? I left him there and I can't just leave him without his stuff. She then messaged him directly and he said, you know what, the nurse is in my room right now. Let me put her on the phone. The nurse took the phone and said, where are you? She said, I'm in this car sitting here. And the nurse said, just give me a moment, I'll be down. A few minutes later, she came. She took the conversation, basically. She didn't take the bag. She said, how are you feeling? What happened? You know, tell me the story. And she said she sat there and she felt so heard by this nurse. And she was crying and telling the nurse what happened. The nurse listened to her. It took a few minutes, knowing she's busy and she's got to get back to the husband. But she took time to listen to her. And then she went to the back. She took the sanitizer. She sprayed the bag, took the bag, and then left. And she said in that moment, she felt the humanity that is stripped from one when we go through this period. And so her even being positive felt that she was stripped of humanity. She wasn't human. And I think for me, the biggest thing that came out of it is the stigma. More so than leaving the people and not seeing them and not being able to comfort them, because yes, that was huge, but I think stigma came out a lot more in my practice.
Yeah. Which is interesting and almost curious, because it's difficult to understand why there would be stigma to something that is really just an illness that anyone can get. You know, so it's difficult to understand that. But then at the same time, I mean, you're talking about the helplessness associated with that, where you know, cannot go where you need to go, cannot make contact with people. All right, so that's quite a difficult one then. And I mean, if we listen to news reports and we read, and then it seems a lot of people really were impacted by that. The absolute powerlessness, helplessness, not being able to reach loved ones and to do the things that they wanted to do. Okay. I'm wondering about further impact, how other ways in which you know, clients were impacted, and especially you know, things that they look for help for. And Lisa, you were talking about anxiety were one of the things that you saw quite a bit, and I'm wondering about whether there were clients who were anxious around themselves and had fears about getting sick, or their family members getting sick, and whether that you know, had an impact on people.
In my practice, I did see it, but it wasn't so much about getting ill. It was more about how we're going to manage life. The children, a lot I found, was feeding off the parents' anxiety. The parents was real stressors that they're facing, financial, with elderly parents, so those kind of things. I also found that one thing I needed to look at was previous traumas with my clients, because the ones, and we know, but I mean, it was one important thing that I felt I really needed to look at is what previous traumas have you had, and have they been addressed and resolved, or as much as possible, because that obviously would then spill over. And I've had quite a few clients that have come in for COVID stressors and trauma, and actually we've spent half a session on it, and obviously the old stuff's come up. So yes, that was one thing that we know happens, but I had to be mindful and aware that we needed to just look at that, because it would have an impact.
Yeah. I mean, previous trauma would add to the vulnerability of people who are during the pandemic placed under further stress and so on. And then I also hear from what Aisha says and what you're saying, that it's not only the emotional impact, but the practical realities that people experience in terms of how they live their lives and what they can and cannot do, and I suppose also accessing resources. Harriet, I'm wondering, in terms of what you've experienced, are there other ways in which people maybe have been impacted, especially I'm thinking in terms of trauma?
You know, Vernon, what I found quite interesting, and that was related to the thing I mentioned earlier about the boundaries of time. I found that because of the routine shifts and the how their days just look different, I found a lot of people kind of were out of were disconnected with their own bodies, the basic needs around eating and sleeping. It's almost like it was this bigger thing that they had to deal with, and almost the routines in the past of having breakfast, lunch, and supper, and making that priority to feed yourself. I really found that people struggled to do that because their working routines were out of sync. They were working from home, and it's almost like they didn't feed themselves. They either didn't feed themselves or they overfed themselves. I don't know if the others found the same.
It really speaks about self-care and how it's impacted people's ability to, I think, the sort of basic everyday functions of looking after oneself and one's family. In other words, I mean, you say that even on that basic level, people's lives were disrupted and they were impacted. So I'm wondering, with what people have experienced, how do you see sort of the role of the social worker in ways in which we can be supportive and be helpful to clients? And Lisa, I'm thinking perhaps starting with you there, and your thoughts on that.
I think just to really, as Aisha said earlier, to hear them. I think a lot of people are feeling unheard and misunderstood and unsupported with the distancing, and it's eased up now, but that really strict time when we weren't allowed to see family and whatever. So for me, the holding space is really important, and then just working with what they bring. I mean, sometimes it is practical things, and sometimes it's just listening to their story, but really just to try and hear them and yeah, meet them where they need to be met. I think it's so different for each one, but to not go in with preconceived ideas about what somebody might need or might not need.
So very much an individual approach, looking at the needs of each individual client, and really working to meet those specific needs. So I think it's very, the next question I want to ask, and sort of just link on to what we're talking about, is I almost want to ask you, what do you think would be, I cannot ask you yet what do you see as the long-term consequences and the impact on people, because we don't yet, we're not there yet, but sort of what do you anticipate would be some of the long-term impact, and how do you see this still being a factor in let's say, the next 6 months to a year in your practice? And I don't know if you want to link on to what you've just said, Lisa, or maybe Harriet, you
Sorry,
could.
Van, are you asking me?
Really for
Oh,
really for anyone. It's really for anyone.
I think it's a loaded question there, hey? It's really a loaded one in terms of that idea of the impact. Because I think people, all of us, not only our clients, we have changed, dramatically in terms of our response to this, pandemic. And so from an emotional perspective, we've changed. A lot of us in our personal spaces have had the same losses that clients have had. And I don't think, and coming back to the self-care thing that Harriet spoke about, is that we don't actually take that into consideration. A lot of us just bounce back, and I'm one of those people. I just bounce, and it's easier not to talk about it. And it's something that I teach my clients not to do. So we don't always practice what we preach. But I listened, I was, listened to some of the presentations on the Trauma Summit. And there was one presentation on bridging from trauma to belonging by Dr. John Powell that really stood out for me. And there was one thing he said, and it just kind of brings it all together for me when he spoke about social distancing and social isolation. And he said, we had this term thrown at us: you have to social distance and you have to socially isolate. But we didn't think about what that meant for people, for humans. And he said, stemming from there, it should have been social solidarity, a positive word, and physical isolation. And it comes back to the families as well. We talked about that earlier, where we said you're telling people to turn to their support systems, but they don't have their support systems. And so he says, instead of looking at it as social distancing and social isolation, let's put a positive spin on the words: social solidarity, physical isolation, and then changing mindsets. And for me, I think that's the biggest thing, that lesson that's come out of COVID for me, is changing mindsets, making people see the positive side of things and not just focused on that anxiety driven grief process, but actually saying, what else is out there, and how can you use this to your advantage? So I don't know if Lisa wants to maybe come in with
Absolutely. And I think it's so important to remember that amidst all this chaos and uncertainty, there definitely is such a thing as post-traumatic growth. And we have to remember that. And that only in sort of being stretched, if I can put it like that, do we find these sort of strengths of ourselves. And when I did one of my presentations to my corporate clients, I was saying to them, and I'm just going to get my notes here, is that the post-traumatic growth, I don't know where it is now, but anyway, it's about a change in relationship with oneself, a change in relationship with others, and a change in relationship with one's view of the world. And I mean, that could be a spiritual thing, it could be just and what my goals or what I'm wanting out of life, that could change profoundly in a time like this. And I think we need to really explore that with our clients, and as Aisha says, not just focus on the negatives or the difficulties, but that there really is such potential for growth through this time.
I'm wondering, Harriet, one of the things that I'll just briefly say that I found that, and I'm wondering if you experience this at all in your practice, is that while I think a lot of us sort of anticipate that while families are locked down, we think that they're at home, they're with a support system. But a lot of my clients actually reported a lot of additional stress because they couldn't get away, because they couldn't have their private time, they couldn't go to work. And for a lot of families, that the experience of actually being locked down and not being able to move at all was added a lot of stresses. I think in terms of people who had to work from home, but at the same time be a full-time parent, and so those roles were sort of thrown together, and was very difficult to manage. I think as people are slowly starting to return to work, maybe some of that is relieved at the moment. But I'm wondering if what the impact of that would be as well. I don't know if you experienced that at all, Harriet.
I think it's a little bit like a wave, that sometimes it really, initially it was a huge big shock, and then I saw a lot of resilience in some of the families where they really used this time to be together and play games, and then the new wave of, okay, but this is carrying on a little bit long, and we have to go back to some kind of work and responsibilities. And then the kind of plateau where now there's a little bit of balance, where some kids are going to school and some parents are going to work at some days of the week. So I think it's just the waves of how sometimes it was really overwhelming, but yeah, a lot of families did show that resilience. And I think when you were talking about the work or the way forward, is really this dramatic growth, and sitting and hearing. I know we're not talking about modalities, but narrative therapy just comes in here with such the story of this trauma, and how we can identify and be respectful to hearing the people, and not assuming that our story is the same as theirs, and just because we're all in the same situation, that we can assume what they went through. I think that the big thing is to be respectful to the spaces where each of them have been, and what this has triggered in them, and that it's their story, that it's just because we all lived through the COVID story doesn't make our story the same, but to respect and individualize our narrative around our experiences.
But I mean, that's very much then about working without making assumptions about people and what they experience, and really being respectful and open-minded as to what it might be like for them. So another thing I'm wondering about, I mean, usually for us as counselors and therapists, most of the time we see clients, we don't experience the same events that they experience. I mean, clients come to us and we're usually in a different space. And this was, I think, kind of unique because we were going through exactly the same event as our clients were experiencing. Our experiences may have been different, and the way that we perceive it, but the same events impacting all of us at the same time it's impacting our clients. What do you think was the impact of that on us as the helpers in this process?
Can I come in there? I think the trauma conference, that international one that was way in the beginning of May, I think Dr. Bessel van der Kolk put it so nicely about the whole thing of this is all new, and that it's so seldom that we are in a similar position than our clients, and that awareness of what goes on in my body when I'm listening to this client explaining how sick they were, or how they were challenged by this experience of their family, and to kind of to manage that, because I'm sitting there thinking, oh, but maybe my husband can be next. You know, so to have that awareness of listening to the client's story, but also know that I have similar fear, and how we listen with different ears, and different understanding when we could be next.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Lisa, if I can ask you maybe to say something about what should social workers do? How do you think we should because I think what Harriet is talking about is one thing in terms of the fear that this may happen to me, but then for a lot of us, it did happen to us, and we did have those same experiences. How should social workers deal with that? And what should we do moving forward in terms of being responsible and making sure that we are okay in order to help our clients?
Exactly. And so one thing I think is to definitely look at our own self-care. And again, we often so quick to tell our clients self-care is so important. But in this time, I think, and I've always known it, but it just became so much more real to me that I really needed to do what I needed to do to keep my tank sort of semi-full. So self-care, I think, is a huge responsibility we need to be mindful of. And then colleague consultation and conversations, I think, is also imperative. You don't lose sort of the broader picture. We've got no frame for this of what's going on. I've never lived through a pandemic, so yeah, to just see what others are experiencing, maybe what works for them, and then also I think our continuing professional development to just try and keep up with that, because again, I think now more than ever things are so different and times are changing, and we need to try and keep abreast of what's going on out there and what's out there on offer.
Yeah.
And I think go ahead, Aisha.
No, sorry, Van, I didn't. I just wanted to add, in terms of the self-care and self-compassion, I think for me, for social workers, and especially the newer social workers that's just been thrown in the deep end with this pandemic, is the importance of supervision, not only peer, consultations, but also just practice supervision to talk through what you're going through. And I think the big platform was the one that you started, Vanna, in terms of just being there as peers. And I think that has been invaluable to a lot of people, especially at the beginning of the pandemic when we had a space to just let it out. So I think for me, that's very important. And I think also just the skills. So because I teach first years and I teach a lot around the skills that social workers use in their sessions, in their counseling sessions, I think the biggest thing that comes out is self-disclosure, which has been challenged greatly. It's something that we don't usually do. But you really just want to say to the person, me too, me too, me too, I know. And so that challenge is quite an issue. And I think the transference and counter-transference, that has come out a lot for me personally, but I also see with colleagues. But I think using that shared experience of this pandemic also has allowed us to get a level of rapport with our clients that we would not have gotten without this. And so that has been a very valuable thing, and something that I can't stress enough. It's been something that has been phenomenal, just in terms of how quickly a client clicks with you and how quickly you can get work done with them because of that initial rapport that's just so solid.
Yeah, I probably one of the things that I don't know about you, but that I experience is that the moving to an online platform and everything that's happened has certainly created a community in South Africa of social workers having a lot more regular contact and discussion and sharing of ideas and sharing of material. And so I think it has created a vision for us in terms of the potential, what we can do with the technology with working online. Not that is the way that we would want, but it has, it's certainly been a catalyst in terms of, motivating us to explore the possibilities. And certainly in terms of making contact with colleagues, I think there's been a lot there. In terms of, if I were to ask you for maybe a final thought or two, for social workers, for our colleagues in the field, and again, what you see as the way forward, perhaps I don't want to be too prescriptive, whatever you think is relevant, but perhaps how do you think could we, again, how could we be relevant? How could we be most useful to clients? I know we've already talked about it to some extent, but what do you see as sort of the priority, perhaps in the next 6 months for us? Maybe we should start with Lisa, and then Harriet, and then Aisha.
I think just to remember that this is a collective trauma, and it's different to the traumas that we're used to working with, which are usually more acute. There usually is an end. Sometimes the actual trauma is even finished by the time we work with a client. So just to remember, this is something we're all going through, and that it's going to be going on for longer than we're used to for trauma to be going on. And then Harriet also made a very important thing that I think is so pertinent, is that the trauma is common. The trauma is common to all of us, but our experiences are also unique. Our experience and our reactions to the stressor. So yeah, just to remember that, even though we think we might all be in the same boat, we're experiencing it all very differently.
Okay, great. Perhaps we could say we're all sort of in the same storm, but maybe not in exactly the same boat in the storm, and sort of, you know, just be aware of the different ways in how people experience this. But then also, I mean, I think what you're saying in terms of the uniqueness of people's experiences would be very important, and the unpredictability that we're still, this is still ongoing, and I think it's going to be ongoing for people for a long time. And so we have to keep, I think, a long-term perspective of things. Harriet?
I think I am super impressed with social workers. I really think I have seen colleagues step up to the plate. I think just the way that we adjusted, I think we are so resourceful and resilient. And I think if you just look at the amount of CPD opportunities that our colleagues have come up with, and the opportunities that we have now to develop ourselves further. I think I haven't ever been on so many training opportunities and conferences, and yeah, if this is what we do during a pandemic, I am really so happy to be part of a community of social workers that yeah, that we've seen we can do our thing, and I think that's really refreshing.
Yeah, I must agree with you. I mean, I think we've seen just so much activity in South Africa around the profession, and SAASWIPP in particular, I think, has created so many events and so many activities, and created support for practitioners, and I think that's been a wonderful experience. Great, Aisha.
Yes, thank you, Werner. I think both of you, Lisa and Harriet, really touched on quite a few, you know, things that are so important. And I think I want to start with Harriet's one in terms of the opportunities that we have been given with our CPD. And I think Lisa spoke about it earlier. I think it has been one of the biggest influx, you know, of information. And yes, there was information overload on a lot of things. I think we had to start being very selective. And so I think going forward, that would be my thing. Be selective about what you choose and look at why you are choosing it. Don't just do everything, because that information overload can also burn you out. And I think a lot of us sit with that. It's like, do I want to do this one? Or I've got 3 in a row today. And so you had to actually unpack that in terms of why are you doing it. So I think just to be mindful of that is very important. And the big thing is to remember to stay with your client. And I think that comes from what Lisa said as well, is we cannot be just assuming things with people just because of this shared situational trauma. We need to say the client is first. I stay with my client and I do what I need to do from there for my client. And so that we are aware of our self-disclosure, that transference and counter-transference, and allow that relationship to actually be fruitful for the client. So that would be my last words.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I'm thinking about how do we pull all of this together, and I mean, the one thing that just stands out for me is how much we actually have to still talk about. I mean, we've barely scratched the surface, and I think there are so many things that we raised that we could probably spend hours talking about. And I think this is a good start. I think we need to start somewhere, and we need to have more conversations like these ones. So I would like to thank you for being part of the discussion today. I'm sure we're going to have many more discussions, and I mean, absolutely, just echoing what you've all said, this is new to all of us. We're pretty much in the same boat in terms of not really knowing a lot of things, but working together, consulting with colleagues, and really drawing on our collective knowledge and strength, I think is the way for us to pull forward.